Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the latest episode of Comic Book Workshop. Today we are looking at the artist Jamie Hewlett. Jamie Hewlett is famous for being the co-creator of Tank Girl as well as the co-creator of Gorillaz, the band. I didn't know that until I started looking at Jamie's work. I knew of his work from the Tank Girl comics that I'm somewhat familiar with. But in all honesty, I didn't realize that he was also the artist of the Gorillas as well, and one of the co-founders of Gorillas, which makes sense because the art style is obviously the same. I just never had put the two together. So we're going to go through some of his still images as well as some of the panel work that he's done, and we're going to break down and take a look at some of the things it is that we can learn from him. And I'm excited about this because I think his style is pretty unique. So one of the first things that I notice is the way that he uses value in an illustration like this, right? So for example, I bring this into a hue scale and I bring down the saturation all the way on just this simple image here. We can see that he's separating his midground, or his, I guess you could say it's its background images with his foreground image of Tank Girl by putting Tank Girl into a classic, basically comic book style with very dark shadows, dark shadow shapes. Whereas the figures in the background, the values are closer together, right? So there's more contrast in the foreground of the characters' values as opposed to the background where the values are much closer together and they're more dimmed down, I guess you could say. Now that's really interesting because I think it helps create this graphic style, and that's something to consider whenever you're doing something that has a very graphic style, which is that you can use the same sort of drawing techniques, but just tone down the black, right? You can put, if it's digital, you can put some sort of a color gradient over it, or you can just dim it down. So we'll go ahead and we'll start getting into some of those comic pages. I guess this is one of the pages from Tank Girl. And yeah, I mean, I really dig his style. I think it's really creative. It's really unique. We see this this appeal to the big empty space here. And a really good comic artist knows how to use empty space as a way to be very economical with what it is that they're doing, right? So we have this opening panel here where we have the majority of the dialogue. But in terms of the art, we can see that the dialogue here is more front and center. And so the art, you could say the detail in the art can take a little bit of uh, a back seat in a sense, right? Like her with her thumb out here, that tells us something about her overall attitude, right? But we don't need to see all the detail of these figures, and we don't need to see the background detail either. And so this big empty space here gives a really good space for the way it is that Tank Girl is positioned on the page, right? And then we uh, get to the second panel, only joking, they're all yours. And then we see them fighting it out back here, right? So we can see that there's different focal points in each one of these panels that the artist is trying to capitalize on in terms of getting us to look at them, right? We can see here that clearly there's the background is where a lot of the visual storytelling is going on. And again, we have this very cartoonish kind of aesthetic, almost a kind of flat, abstract aesthetic in some ways, but again, he's another one of these comic artists that he clearly knows how to do stuff in a very abstract way, but he also knows how to draw things in proper proportions and whatnot. And I think that's what makes his art so interesting to look at, right? He's got a really interesting style. I love the way he draws his skulls as well. So this was a comic called Common People that he used. I guess this is a song by the band name Pulp. And I don't know anything about them. I've never really, again, this is another one of these things that I've never really looked at until I came here. But when I look at these these images here that he created for this comic, what really appeals to me about this comic, and we'll look at some more pages from it, is the level of organization that we have going on here. You know, we have our eyes kind of going in between this sort of thing, right? And something along these lines, right? He's creating these like very interesting ways of using lines and using shapes to kind of direct our attention. And he's very specific with the way that he does each one of these, right? Like I love this pinstriped suit that he's using here in order to direct our eyes downwards. And notice that he's really just using a lot of line work and flat shapes with flat gradients, almost like I mean, this is basically a halftone. You know, he's using these halftones, which it honestly makes me wonder if he's doing this digitally. He's using these different halftones, and he's able to do all sorts of smart things with it, right? Like, for example, he has this figure here, which is kind of like the main focal point of the page. But we notice that his head is actually coming out of the panel and is actually casting a shadow on the page, which is really interesting. And then you can see that this is also his shadow right here, this big black shape. And notice that this big black shape of the shadow that's on the side of his head is also connecting with the hair shape here, right? And this is something I've talked a lot about on this channel, which is that there's a lot of different ways it is that you can think about designing a comic page, but one way to think about that is to think about it in terms of organizing black and white shapes, organizing uh, different tones together, right? And so we see this all the time where we have these big black shapes that kind of mold into other aspects of an illustration that also contain that black, right? It also really creates this nice, beautiful dynamic here where we see that his black shirt kind of blends in with his background here, right? And then a really cool, awesome shot of these hands. His hands here is just, man, it's really something else. And we can see again, you know, we have this kind of, I want to say almost collage-like comic book sort of thing going on, because in some of these images it doesn't feel so much as a cohesive story. It feels like a story that somebody's telling, probably, right? And again, you know, I love the way it is that he extends these. He has characters extend out of one panel and go into another, and they're creating this kind of visual form, right? So we almost think that we read it like this, right? And since this intersects with this, we turn our eyes that way, and then of course we're looking at the woman down here. Yeah, it's really interesting because he's able to use, you know, halftone, these very basic halftones in order to create these kind of abstract, almost Vogue-like backgrounds for his characters to have these conversations on. While at the same time, the faces and the bodies, the heads definitely seem out of proportion to the faces, but they're all very well illustrated, right? You can tell that he has a lot of talent um, with being able to draw expressions and keep the faces cohesive, right? So yeah, I love that he kind of has this mix of like an abstract elements to his illustration. You know, we have this element of money here, but then we have this kind of textured element of what the texture of money might be here, right? And then, of course, we have these halftones dropped in here, these very beautiful halftones that break up the illustrations. And I like that he goes for these sort of abstract environments rather than literal environments in these pieces. But we see in some of his other stuff, such as this page right here. Not sure where this is, what comic this is from. We can see this figure holding up a jacket and fitting it onto this child who's trying to get out into the water. So we can see that he can do these like kind of naturalistic environments and these natural kind of back and forth exchanges between the different characters. But he can also do this kind of abstract style, right? Yeah, so the other thing that he's really good at is obviously just the overall finish of a illustration. I love the way that he uses color, but I also love the way that he uses his cultural references. So we've got one of his characters here. I'm not sure who exactly that's supposed to be, if anything. But she's dressed up like Ultraman, and she's sitting down to take a break and eating some noodles. And I really appreciate, again, we have this kind of dimming of the background. If I bring in this hue scale and I dumb it down, we can see again that there's a difference between the foreground elements and the background elements, which is interesting because the lights are obviously background elements, but they don't really cast any light on the figures in the background. Instead, it's almost like light that separates the background characters from the foreground characters, right? And we see that the majority of the light and the detail is saved for the three characters it is that we have up front. And I also think it's very clever that he doesn't. I don't know if this is intentional or it's just the image that I grabbed, but over here on the left, we have this geisha over here, and it looks like she's got her breast popped out. And it's a tantalizing aspect of the image. It's like you obviously want to see more of this geisha over here, but he kind of only gives you a brief tease of it and leaves you wanting more, right? And you could also say that same thing on the other side of this as well. And I think that that is an element of storytelling, right? So on the right side of the image, we see that the astronaut is eating some sort of an alien or some sort of a squid, but we can't see the full thing. So it's left up to our imagination. And so you can start to inject all sorts of story into this. Is this some sort of a cafe for misfits or something like that? Are these all people that are cosplaying, or is it a mix of people that are cosplaying as well as like real life people? Did this spaceman capture these aliens that is eating? These are all questions that kind of pop into your mind. I also really appreciate the way that he draws the hands, right? He's got these very kind of triangular sort of things going on with the hands here that is really quite interesting, right? Or I guess you wouldn't say triangular, but more rectangular. It might be the answer, but he's got some interesting shapes for the hands, and I think that if you're looking for somebody to study for how to draw these kind of cartoonish, expressive hands, this might be the guy to do so. I really appreciate the amount of design work that this guy is able to do. I think that it's really rare to see somebody who's really good at designing, but then is also really good at actually doing the comics as well as doing music. So Jamie is pretty well set in the talent category. But we can see in each one of these characters that there's general silhouettes. Like we can think in terms of size, both size in terms of how big they are, but also and how small they are, right? We have her, she's very small. These two guys, they feel like they're kind of like, arch nemesis or twins in a sense, or, variations of one another. Like this is the dark version of this guy. I don't know anything about Brothers, so I don't know if that has any kind of validity to it. But each one of these characters is designed with a specific personality. I like the way that this guy is holding the banana in his hands down by his crotch, right? I guess that's pretty fitting for his personality. And so each one of these characters it has its own unique design, it has its own unique personality, and I think that's one of the reasons why people gravitated towards gorillas whenever they first showed up. I guess this is in 2017. So, and again, we'll go ahead and we'll close it out with another one of these shots. Again, I think it's really cool that he kind of has these abstract designs with his illustrations, and it really shows the different ways in which it is that you can do a comic book. We look at some of the Tank Girl stuff, and we can see a much more rendered, finished image. And we can also see that he can do these complicated environments, but then he can also do these very abstract pieces here. So that's all it is that I have for you today. Each week I do these tutorials as well as a podcast, and I would like to ask for those who do this, who come to this channel regularly, if you're interested, please give me a like, give me a sub. It really helps out. And if you really want to support what it is that I do, I have a Buy Me a Coffee link down in the description. I'm also going to be offering other things as well in the future. You can also check out my comic, The Philip K. Dick Files, down in the link in the description box below. And please feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any artist it is you'd like for me to look at. Thanks, guys. Take care.